and I always wanted to be a fighter pilot. Top Gun was a big inspiration for me too. But at the time, women were not allowed to fly in fighters. And my dad told me about the story of the World War II WASP, women who flew every single aircraft in the inventory during World War II. And he said, they changed the rules so that women couldn't fly, and someday they will change it back so women can fly fighters. And it's your job to be prepared and qualified when they change the rules so that you can do what you want to do. And that's what happened. So in 1993, April, they changed the combat exclusion for women, and I graduated high school in 1994 and entered the Air Force Academy. So that's how things really started.
Carolyn Jensen is a retired lieutenant colonel in the USAF. She graduated from the Air Force Academy. She's been a flight instructor, an F-16 pilot, and a member of the prestigious Thunderbirds. Her path is a testament to hard work, perseverance, and most of all, inspiration. And it all started with a childhood dream of flying. Come be inspired by this remarkable woman. Welcome, Carolyn Jensen, to Bump in the Road. Carolyn, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Hi, Pat. Thank you for having me on. My story, I guess it revolves a lot around being a pilot. And so I'll go back to the first time I saw airplanes and had the concept of becoming a pilot. And that would be at my parents' farmhouse in Wisconsin at 6 years old. I had a stomach ache and came downstairs, and my parents were watching a movie, and it had a biplane flying around the clouds, like big cumulonimbus clouds. And so I was really taken with the idea of flying in the clouds and what it would be like if you could fly through them as a little kid. You're like, what are they made of? Can you walk in them? And whatnot. So that's really where I kind of had this like spark of, I really want to like be in the sky. And then I grew up with military service in my family. My grandmother on my mom's side was actually a spar in the Coast Guard during World War II. She volunteered to leave her home and everything that was comfortable and go be part of the war effort. And my father's father also was in the Coast Guard on a cutter called Dwayne in the North Atlantic, and had crazy stories about really rough seas and capturing German submarines, and just really fascinating people. And then my dad also served as a Marine Corps helicopter pilot during Vietnam. So as a child, he was still flying, and he would take us out to the base, Camp Ripley, Minnesota, and they'd have C-130s flying over, dropping cargo, and people out the back, and helicopters landing. And I went to a 10-year-old girl's birthday party once, and I think her dad was like the base commander, and we rode in tanks, sat in helicopters, and then we watched Miss America that night and played Barbies. So it was like really cool and enamored with like the whole military lifestyle. And so that's where I decided to go into the military. And I always wanted to be a fighter pilot. Top Gun was a big inspiration for me too. But at the time, women were not allowed to fly in fighters. And my dad told me about the story of the World War II WASP, women who flew every single aircraft in the inventory during World War II. And he said, they changed the rules so that women couldn't fly, and someday they will change it back so women can fly fighters. And it's your job to be prepared and qualified when they change the rules so that you can do what you want to do. And that's what happened. So in 1993, April, they changed the combat exclusion for women, and I graduated high school in 1994 and entered the Air Force Academy. So that's how things really started.
And talk a little bit about your progression with aircraft and how you ended up flying with the Thunderbirds.
Yeah, that's a really interesting story, because I knew I wanted to be a fighter pilot and wanted to be a pilot for a long time. And when I went to the Air Force Academy, I'd been on a round trip on an airliner, and I had one flight in a Cessna 172. That was it. So the fourth time I was ever, not Earth, held to Earth, was my flight to the Air Force Academy for basic training. At the Academy, they have a Soar for All program. And that means everybody gets to fly a glider, and it usually takes like 12 to 15 flights in a glider, and then you get to go solo. And that course is led by officers, but like almost all of the instructors are cadets. And so at the end of your regular soar for all, after you solo, you can take a check ride and compete. And I was selected to be a soaring instructor pilot. And so I earned about 120 hours that were like 0.1 or 0.2 at a time because we did not solo, or we did not do thermals. We did not go cross country. We were arrow towed up by a Belanca scout, released about 8,500 feet over the academy. The airfield elevation's like 6,000 feet. I think we're close to a mile high. And that's how I learned how to fly. And I really loved it. It taught me a lot of airmanship, and it did me well going into pilot training. I flew the T-37 Tweet, was the nickname of that aircraft. It had a very, very loud whistle noise. People who spend a lot of time in it actually experience hearing loss. I flew the T-38, and then I was a first assignment instructor pilot in the T-38 also. So I stayed on in pilot training and was an instructor for 3 years. Then I got selected to fly the 9G multi-role fighter, the F-16. I flew that in Korea, came back and was stationed at Hill, and I flew in Iraq. Also, I have over 200 combat hours flying in the F-16 over Iraq. And then I came home and I decided to leave active duty. And I got a job as a reserve T-38 instructor, again, pilot training instructor. And unbeknownst to me, I was pregnant. So I ended up having a son while I transitioned from a combat sortie or a combat deployment back to pilot training. And I really wanted to get back in the F-16. And a magazine came to my house, and it was about the first reserve Thunderbird pilot. And I was in the reserves at that point, and I was like, well, heck, I'll apply. So I applied for the Thunderbirds and got selected. So I went back into the F-16, flew on the Thunderbirds. It was supposed to be a 2-year tour, but we ended up with 3 years because we were, the government went into sequestration in 2013. So they decided to hold us over for another year. And then after that, I worked in DC, came back, flew the F-16 again in 2 different squadrons, doing pretend, that's a bad word for it, but training for joint,
Joint maneuvers or?
No, it's JTAC. I'm trying to remember what the acronym is. So we came back and we did a bunch of training for the ground controllers who call in airstrikes, which is really fun to fly because you get to go and drop little bombs and do strafing every single day. And you have, the guys training to control you in for that. And then my last flying assignment in the Air Force was as an aggressor pilot. So we were part of all the big red flags and the weapons school, like the Air Force's version of Top Gun. Weapons school was there, and I did a lot of flying to support that. So then I retired. And then I think one of the coolest planes I've ever flown is I have 5 hours in the T-7A Red Hawk. That is a Boeing product. I was a salesperson, but I was allowed to get checked out and hang out with the test pilots too sometimes. So I went through a bunch of sims. I flew 5 hours in it. I got to take it to General Brown, his change of command at Andrews Air Force Base when he took over as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And he is now Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, which is pretty cool. And so that was the last kind of real, flying I did in military aircraft. So it's been an exciting career.
That's been an amazing career. Out of curiosity, as you start getting into higher performance planes like the F-16, what are some of the hurdles you face, or do you work those all out ahead of time in the simulator?
Honestly, when you say hurdles, I just think of, since I was at the first wave of women to be able to fly, there were the gear was not appropriate for us. And you fly long missions, you need to have a way to relieve your bladder during it. And nothing was really suited for women. They certain people in the Air Force were afraid women weren't strong enough to be able to handle the aircraft. And in reality, it doesn't care if you're a man or a woman. But the Air Force created a fighter air crew test called the FACT test. And it was purely based off your weight. So 150-pound man and 150-pound woman have to do the exact same weightlifting. And it was bench presses, arm curls, leg extensions, squats. It was very, very difficult. So especially the body composition of a woman compared to a man at any weight is really different. I never heard of anyone who failed it, but man, I worked my butt off to get through that. The centrifuge too, going up to 9 Gs in the centrifuge, spinning around in a room, like it, that was really, really challenging. But flying the aircraft itself, they are very complex machines, but they're made so that they're almost like an extension of you when you get inside of it. It's very intuitive to fly the airplane around. You have really responsive throttles, so you can, it's harder to slow down a little bit usually, but there's tricks for everything. And they're very forgiving. And, flying the aircraft is secondary. It's like we don't think about breathing or walking. Like your job in that is to monitor your sensors, look at your targeting pod, look at your radar, look at your large area display, and to have awareness on what's going on in the air picture and the ground picture outside of you, because you're training to support people in time of war. So the actual flying of the airplane itself is pretty becomes pretty second nature. People who have a hard time with it, and it's not a lot, it's just you're moving so fast. So you're not flying your Cessna around at 100 knots anymore. Like you're readily, like you come up initial at 300 knots, you land around 150 knots. So everything happens a lot quicker. So getting ahead of the airplane and learning how to slow things down is a good metaphor, something to learn in life, but definitely really good when you're flying an advanced fighter.
No, that is a good metaphor, and actually, that's where my question was pointed, because having gotten into an aircraft that was beyond my ability to fly it and still flying it, I really understand the idea of not letting the aircraft get ahead of you. And, with something moving that fast, you have to be on top of everything.
Yep. And it's great. Like I really enjoyed it. So I'd come from combat and in Iraq, and I was there during the surge, and Al Qaeda was very aggressive, doing attacks on bases with mortars and civilians and villages. And so we were really busy, and there's codes for everything. There's like the airspace was made into codes, and it was like these like long numbers that you had to go into this guide and decipher like what square they gave you, and then translate that into putting it into your cockpit to like draw your airspace so that you didn't go into other airspace, because you have like a block, and it's, there's limitations to it over the ground and then altitude limitations to it as well. And then you had a tanker, and they're on a different frequency, and you have a different frequency for your controllers, and you have other people that are layered beneath you in this like area to make sure that our troops and our allies are safe on the ground. And then you'd have to keep an eye on like, well, is the airfield still good to go? Can I go back there and land? And how much fuel do I need for that? And it was just like, but it became like so zen, and it was great. And so then I had a baby, and I felt like my brain got scrambled eggs, and I couldn't find words. You don't, my son his superpowers, he's still at 15 and a half years old. Like he's a really good sleeper. So thank goodness, like he did that, but it still wasn't enough for me. And after 4 months after he was born was when I flew my first flight in the T-38 again. And it was so lovely to just rewire my brain, because everything was still in there, and it just brought everything back together. So, yeah, I don't know, the complexities, it grows on you, the repetition, it's not boring. It becomes, I mean, I guess some people are bored with repetition, but like on the Thunderbirds also, we do the same show over and over and over again, but the ground is different. Are you over mountains? Are you over the ocean? Are the boats moving that are supposed to be like stabilized positions to like set up for the deconfliction for the show? There's just like so many wonderful things that are really complex that just become second nature, and it feels good to kind of be in that space where you can control most of what is going on.
Tell us about the Thunderbirds.
Oh, let's see. One thing I really love to tell people is that the Thunderbirds tour and that job is 5% flying and 95% human interactions. So you are on the road constantly with your team. Like you fly with the same 6 people for a whole year, and then they switch out. And because we were delayed, I was with the same team for 2 years. So you get to know each other really well. and you can tell, like, man, did you get in a fight with your wife today? Like something's like not right, you know? So just everyone comes to the table to brief, and you kind of can just like look at people and assess how they're doing. You know, and then there's always going to be some kind of personality conflicts, and you really have to put all of that aside. And like when you're doing your job, you're doing your job. And then we're also like 120 enlisted folks on the team who do all sorts of different jobs, like over 30 different jobs from the Air Force. So that's very unique too, as far as the people are concerned. And then you're on the road and you're in different cities, and you've got people wanting your autographs who are like smushing young children up against like barriers. And then you're going into meeting community leaders and, you know, governors and all this kind of crazy stuff. So like the really kind of taxing part about it was changing time zones a lot, and dealing with a lot of people. And you represent, like at the time it was like 600,000 people, men and women in the Air Force, and you can't really have a bad day, or like if you kind of have like an attitude with somebody because you're having a bad day, or you deal with something in a harsh way, it reflects on everybody. So you really just had to kind of keep a good face, figure out how to diffuse situations if they arose, like in a way that was helpful and kind and thoughtful. And then, you know, you were always on as long as you were in that uniform, even if it was at the hotel riding the elevator up to your room and there's kids in the, you know, elevator, you wanted to say hi and talk to them. And so that was like the really interesting part. But the flying was a lot of fun, and it starts out being kind of uncomfortable, and we all have self-preservation instincts that kick in and make you kind of want to be away, but you're really training yourself to be in there. There are a lot of maneuvers where you just really have to trust your leader, because they're, you know, doing maneuvers, and I'm like looking up at the sky as he's recovering down. So I'm like, the earth is off my right wing, but all I'm doing is looking up to the left at him. And I have to trust that he's not going to scrape me off on the desert or the ocean or whatever. So there's a lot of trust that you build up there. And by the end of the tour, if you're like an inch away, it feels like a mile. And it's just like so fun, and you understand where everyone is. And I love when I do my speeches and I talk about the Thunderbirds, I have a video that you can hear the calm and you can hear the voices, and you know how important communication is. Like literally we said the same thing thousands of times, but if the boss said right turn, then it was going to be right turn, boom, and we were going to turn. If he was like right turn, then it was going to be a smooth like roll in. And so you learned about intonation, and we would kind of like make jokes with the communication. If a solo, they had like, one of us had Victor, and the other, like the 4 Diamond pilots had uniform radio, I think, and the 2 solos had Victor radio. And they'd say something, and then you could like mock them with like the next radio call. If they said something in a crazy way, you could say it back. And so there's like all of this like different styles of communication going on. So I don't know, it was such fun flying. It was really amazing flying.
Is there I listened to this, and wow, to be flying that close at that speed is just astonishing. Do you have to work into it a little bit, or does it come pretty quickly?
No, it's a building block approach. So when you first get there, you literally just go out in a 2-ship, and I was the right wing pilot, which meant I was flying off the right wing of the boss, like looking left. And in pilot training, you learn how to do fingertip. Once you get out into the regular combat Air Force, you don't do that anymore. So the fact that I had come from teaching students how to do close formation helped me as the right wing to be very successful. But you start out with 2 airplanes, and you just go, and you start doing like lazy eights and formation. And I will also say that when I first got selected, I got a lot of attention because I was a woman, and you know, like it never does you any good to read comments on the internet, because people say all sorts of stuff. But I just felt this immense pressure, because I'm like, if I fail, everyone's going to know. Right. And the guy that I replaced, the person that they hired washed out of training, and then he took over. And on the left wing side, the same thing had happened. The guy did not make it through training, and they brought in another pilot. So these positions are very difficult and had a recent history of like people not making it through the training. And I'm like, everyone's going to know. And I remember flying over, it was like Death Valley, California, which is beautiful from the air, and we're doing like wing work, and I look down and I just remember like just kind of surrendering to all the pressure and thinking, this is amazing. Like I'm staring at like this beautiful landscape and through a red, white, and blue F-16 at like 120 degrees of bank. Like I'm going to enjoy like every moment. And from then I was like sleeping better, performing better, just everything, you know, and luckily for me, that was early on. So you start with that 2-ship, and then you add 3 aircraft, and they also start with the easy maneuvers, which by the way, none of them are easy, but like you might just practice loops and rolls, and then your floor for your out, you start at like 5,000 feet, and then you work down like 3,000 feet and 1,000 feet and 500 feet. And you work from 2 airplanes to 3 airplanes to 4 airplanes to the whole 6-ship together. So it's a real building block approach to get to see what you see when you go to an air show.
Now, you've really been active with the WASPs as well, haven't you?
Yes. So when I wanted to be a fighter pilot and it wasn't able, I told you earlier, my dad was like, well, the World War II WASP flew everything. Like they flew all the different airframes. And so I like started reading books and articles and kind of everything I could get my hands on. And they were so inspirational to me. It's really what kept me going and kept me working. And, especially like being an 80s kid and seeing my grandma who like worked on a farm. My grandpa, she taught in a 1-room schoolhouse for a while. My grandpa they had a farm, and he was the school bus driver, and grandma and grandpa would get on the bus and go pick up all the kids and go to the 1-room schoolhouse, and they're working this farm. And but she just was always like so proud of being in the military and kind of that World War II era. My dad was also born on Christmas Eve of 1942. And then my grandfather shipped off to war like within days of his firstborn child. And so that World War II history really hit me. But to see these women who did what I wanted to do, who defied the odds, defied society, Jackie Cochran and Nancy Love, like got qualified women in the cockpit. It was so inspirational to me. And so even when I had tough times going through like academically at the academy or through my career, I just, really thought this is a good problem to have, right? Like the WASP would have traded their right arm to be here. And I was so fortunate to become friends with a number of WASP and have great interactions with them and, phone calls and be a part of the WASP homecoming that happens every year at the end of April in Sweetwater, Texas at Avenger Field, where they trained during World War II. And, honestly, just like 2 weeks ago, one of my dear friends is named Mickey Bright, and she's 103 and is a WASP. And I went to visit her at her home, and we sat and talked for like 9 hours one day and 2 hours the next day, and about her love of the B-25 and all the missions she flew when she was at Biggs Army Airfield. And it's just, I've gotten so much from these women, and I just also want to give back and give my thanks and share some of my experiences that were completely made possible by their service. Like I got my wings. Actually, I wear WASP wings because I earned my wings because they earned these wings. So it's always been inspirational. I love their story. And in our country that is so divided, I think it's something that can unify all of us just to be in awe and respect the service of Americans who like broke the norm to go out and do something bigger than themselves.
The WASPs are amazing. In '95, I had my plane in the show in Oshkosh, and the WASPs obviously had a big display. And so I went and I bought a bunch of books and some stationery, but I bought a little Fifth Vanilla pin that I pinned in my
Yeah.
cockpit. And I still have that pin, and
Oh,
I just love it. It speaks to me. Uh-huh.
yeah.
It speaks to me of generations of trailblazing women who just really defied the norms and did extraordinary things. I really would love to see more people aware of the role the WASPs played in World War II because they were critical to the Allied
Yeah.
war effort.
Yeah, absolutely. They did all the missions except for combat, and the idea was to free up men so that they could go into combat. And they ferried aircraft. Mickey
They
told
towed
stories.
targets and were
Yes.
shot
So,
at.
yeah, that's Mickey did that at Biggs, and she said they would do like searchlight missions too, where they fly around and they're like looking for them at lights, and then they're shooting the target. She's like, as soon as flak went off in front of us, like we were done for the day. One of the most interesting things she told me was they basically gave her like shoe boxes full of like torn up aluminum foil. And it was like the beginning of chaff, like trying to get the radar so they'd go fly and the radar's looking at them and they drop this aluminum foil out the side of the airplane and see what it did to the radar picture. So it was like the beginning of, some like covert and tactics. And, in the F-16, we have like magnesium flares and, chaff and stuff like that. It's like part of tactics that I was using. And she started all out with aluminum foil in a shoebox.
You have a book out, don't you?
I do. I wrote a children's book called Thunder Mouse, and it's based off of, it's fictional, but it's based off of the story that my son and I came up with to help us cope with separation while I was traveling on the road with the Thunderbirds. So I was gone from March through November, and I'd leave on Thursday and come home on Monday, and Tuesday we had practice. So Wednesday was my only real day off. My son was 3.5 when I went to the team to fly with the Thunderbirds. And so he just really missed mom, and I missed him too. And he's like, I really want to go with you. And I said, but there's only one seat in the plane. Like, I can't bring you with me. There's nowhere for you to sit. And he said, but Mom, what if I turned into a mouse and then I could hide in your pocket and I could go into the cockpit with you? So the story is about Thunder Mouse, who's a mouse that is in cahoots with the sun, who makes him a little mouse helmet, a little mouse flight suit. And he sneaks into mom's luggage when she goes on the trip. And once the engines start up, he like comes out unaware and sits on mom's shoulder and gets to fly across America and gets to fly the air shows. And then when they go home, he sneaks back into Finn's room while he's asleep and whispers into his ear about all the stories. And so that his son can dream that he's with his mom. So it's about connection and military families and any families who really have to deal with separation for work or medical issues or divorce, things like that. So it's been really fun. And I'm working on completing an audiobook with some very talented folks producing it. And it's amazing. It's super immersive and it's beautiful. So I can't wait to release that. It should be out here by probably September here of 2024. So I think people are going to love it.
Oh, it sounds fantastic. If you could, looking back over your amazing career, what 3 traits would you say really helped you navigate just an incredible professional landscape?
Determination is number one. Like, I don't have any tattoos, but I kind of feel like if I get one, it's got to be that. I don't know. Like, just be determined and stick to it and push through. And then, although I didn't feel like it at the time and it was super painful, it would be just like harnessing failures. And I do public speaking and corporate speaking and counseling. And that's kind of one of the things to get people to view the failures as like they are bricks that you build your roads to success on, right? And a lot of times, especially as pilots, and I'm sure you've heard this, people are like, oh, well, I wanted to be a pilot, but, and as long as it's not like a hard stop, like medical issue, even financially, there's ways now to kind of work through that, but not letting those things like hold you up and continuing to push forward and trying to find a way around and finding the right network of people. And I think thirdly, it was always very difficult for me to ask for help. And that's why mentoring to me is so important. I love mentoring in, the corporate world, but also I love to mentor young aspiring pilots. But finding the right people. And I didn't have, I had the WASP for female role models to look up to. And there's like 70 years between us, but I found a lot of help and amazing mentorship from them. My own father, who's a Marine Corps Vietnam helicopter pilot, was a great mentor to me and helped keep me motivated. The liaison officer that I went to, I think he flew F-4s in Vietnam. He's like a rancher, big mustache. And when I went to talk to him when I was like 12 or 13, he was like, well, you're too young and, women can't fly fighters when I first talked to him. And that man had moved to Colorado. He flew back to Wisconsin, came to my kitchen table in River Falls, and he was the one who gave me my cadet interview to help me get into the academy. So not me going in and seeing this burly man tell me that I couldn't do what I wanted to do, and just continuing to build a relationship, and then having him be like probably one of the linchpins in me getting into the academy eventually, working through that and seeking mentorship. And it's great when you can find someone who looks like you, because it's easy to identify, but just keep pushing through that and you'll find like the most wonderful mentors in unexpected places.
Do you see a lot of similarities between your experience in the Air Force and in corporate America? Because one of the things that strikes me is flying with any of the services, it's really a life or death thing. You have a lot of people involved. The ability to fly an aircraft depends on certainly the pilot, but also air traffic control, probably use a different word in the military, the whole crew and everything else. And the cost of a mistake is huge. It's real.
Yeah.
You don't have the same urgency, I don't think, in corporate America. How do you translate those incredible experiences from the armed forces into a corporate world?
Um, so, I mean, I can speak specifically to the T7 program in Boeing, and I felt like that's what I brought to the table. Just letting them know like how important what they were working on is. And I had a difficult time too transitioning to my year and a half that I worked in the Senate, because nothing happens now. And in the Air Force, you go out and you plan a mission. It's really complex. You go fly it and you come back that day and you talk about it for hours and you figure out what the lessons learned are and how to be better. And those processes in government and in the corporation take years to come to fruition very frequently. Um, and so I think that there's a lot of lessons that you can take with good communication, whether it's ATC or, your crew chief, or, it's easy to overlook people sometimes who aren't directly like, I'm flying an airplane. Well, guess what? One of my favorite people in the squadron was our finance guy. Like, he did all of our orders and he made sure that our government travel cards weren't like overdue. And like, he was a huge part of keeping that squadron functioning. So just really like seeing people on your team at all levels, because, and making sure that they know that they are valuable parts of the team. It's, the old phrase, like, you can't see the forest for the trees. I think that happens a lot. And because of the duration that it takes to get results, it can be really easy to overlook how important what you're doing is today, because it doesn't like immediately affect the debrief at the end of the day. It might take a lot longer to do that. But definitely communication and teamwork are things that are always good, and I think people take for granted sometimes. And seeking feedback too. There's a lot of feedback in the military, and especially in the debrief. And that's something that I experienced was like not always easy for people to give feedback, and maybe not always easy for people to receive either. But to foster a collaborative environment where you can make mistakes and you can learn from them, and you're not hiding and you're not walking around scared, and you're not acting, you're taking appropriate calculated risks and not being risk adverse. That's how you really move things forward in your company. And that's how we operated in the military.
That debrief part of flying is so intriguing and such a wonderful educational opportunity. As you're talking about this, I'm thinking, where can I put a debrief in my life? Because it would be really helpful to get that kind of feedback on many things.
You can honestly do it every day. Like, and I
Yeah.
don't know, there's a lot of people who deal with like insomnia and just like laying down. I've like talked to people and they're like, what'd you do today? And I'm like literally someone just asked me, how did yesterday go? And I'm like, I don't even remember what I did yesterday right now. But at the end of the day, I know I went to bed thinking about the podcast taping that we're going to do live. And I thought about like travel arrangements for this. And if you can just like sit down at the end of the day, and I've done this for a while, and now that we're talking about it, I'm going to go back to doing it, just like write down. So you can just put a bow on what you did for today. And then that sets you up for what you did the next day and how can you do things better, or like, or you think, oh man, I really need to talk to her about this venue. And then you kind of forget about it and you ramble through the next day or two and you're like, oh, I forgot to go back and ask that. But just kind of writing things down and having a structure, even if it's in your mind, to to go through and catalog and be like, okay, this is where I am at, this is how I performed, and this is what I need to do tomorrow, is, it sounds really OCD, but it's really helpful, especially for people who kind of feel like cluttered and you have a lot of talk going on inside of your head.
I think that's really good advice because it's easy to forget about all the little steps you take that lead to
Mm.
success. You don't see them, and yet they're all critical.
Yes, everything is built upon like everything you do every day. I love the book Atomic Habits, and it talks about like 1 degree of change. And they do an aviation analogy. I think it was like if you take off from LA and you vary 1 degree to the left, and you're going to Washington, D.C., and you vary 1 degree to the left at the end of your flight, you're going to be in New York City, like, and you don't realize that there, because it's just 1 degree, but in the long run, it makes a big difference in where your destination is.